Hi and welcome to this Python course. So in this Python course, I'm going to show you different things you can actually do using Python and MySQL database. As you can see, I've actually created a table here and I've actually loaded it. So there are different functions I can actually do. I can actually add an individual new item, or I can even make changes to an item. So let's see what happens when I want to edit a certain name. So let's edit the name Sandra here. So let's actually try to edit that. As you can see, I can actually change this to anything. Let's add a name, for example. Let's add the name Mary to the very end, and let's imagine we've actually changed her profession to mechanical engineer. As you can see, when I actually click, I can actually update this. Let's click update. As you can see, when I actually load this, you can actually see the information has actually changed. So I can actually do that and actually do so much more. I can actually delete different items on the database, and that would also work. So there are different functions for that. Then I can actually even update different items. I can load items and so much more inside this video. So get ready for something new. Alright, since we're going to work with Python and MySQL, it's only wise if we know what MySQL actually really means. So MySQL is an open source relational database management system. So its name is a combination of my, the name of the co-founder Michael with DS daughter, MySQL, the acronym for structured query language. So we're going to be doing this, and we're actually going to use the server XAMPP to actually handle the database at the back end. So we're going to be using XAMPP, and that's going to be critical. And then this is actually what we're going to be having at the back end. So we're going to have a table like this. So this is a table inside the database called employees, and the table name shall be employees list. So this is what you should actually expect at the back end. And then lastly, this is what we're going to have at the front end. So this is what the user will be interacting with. So the user will be able to add data to the table, update the data in the table, delete data from the table, as you can see, and all different kinds of editing. And as you can see, the data here is actually displayed on a QTable widget. So I'm going to be using the knowledge of Pyside6, which is basically the latest version of PyQt currently in this video. Alright, so first things first, you can actually see my XAMPP server is actually running. So make sure it's actually set on at the very beginning. Then now when I go to phpMyAdmin, this is actually what I have at the back end. So I've already created a database called employees right here, and then inside it I've actually created a list. Inside it I've actually created a table. So a table is called employees list, and as you can see, it is an empty table with headings, name, profession, address, and age right here. So age is an integer and the other different items are text, as you can see. Now one thing that we should do is to actually install the MySQL connector inside our computer. So we're going to go here. So now for me, I'm going to be using the Anaconda command prompt, but you can use your prompt. So I'm going to type in pip install pip3 install dot / MySQL connector dash Python. Then I'll click enter, and it should actually start installing. Now you're going to wait until it installs, and once it's done installing, you can now close this window. Alright, so we're in Visual Studio Code. So first thing first is we're going to open and create a folder. So go to your desktop. I choose my desktop because that's where I want to save it. Then I'm going to create a new folder on my desktop. I'm going to call this MySQL Python project. I believe that name will work for us. Then we can actually save that folder. So we're going to open it, then just accept the settings. So go inside, then we're going to create some two files. So the first file is going to be the main file. I'm going to call it mainfile.py. And then the next one shall be database.py. So these are two Python files. Then we're going to actually import some components. So import from Pyside6 Qt widgets, we're going to import Q application. Right, now that we're done with that, we can now go into the database.py. So inside here, we're also going to do some imports of components. Alright, so on first time, we're going to import MySQL.connector. Then we're going to go and import from Pyside6 Qt widgets. So we're going to import different items in widgets. So we're going to have Q push button, Q widget, QV box layout. That should also be key. We're going to have the QH box layout. Then we should also need the Q message box. we're going to need the Q table widget. Then we're also going to need the Q table widget items. Then we're also going to import the Q label, Q line edit. All these will be Q group box. At least all these will be key. So once we're done with that, we can now go to the next line. So just click enter. So we're going to create our class. So the class shall be widget. Then it's going to be a subclass of Q widget. So now that we have that, we're going to now set the first method. So we're going to have init self. Then we're going to have super dot underscore init, close that. Then we're going to now set a Windows title. So self set Windows title. We're going to call this, so it shall be called MySQL database connect. Alright, so now we're going to set its geometry. So we're going to have it on, so the layout on the X and Y axis 100, 100, then 500 by 100. So now we're going to go back into the main, then we're also going to do some more imports. But now we're going to first connect that database file externally to this main file. So that's going to be the first thing. So we're going to type in, and then we're going to have from database. So that's going to be connecting to it externally. We're going to import, so we're going to import its main class. So we're going to import the widget class that we actually have inside it. So inside here, we're also going to make the import of the sys. You know, this will help us with some command line work. Then we're going to type in the variable app. It's going to be an instance of the Q application. All right, so we have that. Then we're going to type in sys.argv. Alright, next we can go to the next line. Then we're going to create an instance of that widget class. So we're going to have that way. And then next we're going to type in Q widget. So we're going to show it. So we're going to show it widget.show. Then next we're going to execute our file. So app.execute. So that's going to be very key. Now that we've done that, we can now test our application. So let's go back into the main and test. So click here. Then we're going to run it, and then we can actually now say it actually works. You can even see the title working. So our app is working. So now that we've done that, we can now continue from here. Alright, so now we can add some more functions. So we're going to have a function for creating the connection. Then we're going to have that for inserting data. Then we're also going to have that for loading data. We'll have one for adding data that will also be separate. We're also going to have one for calling data. We shall see how to use that. Then we're going to have one for updating data. Then we shall also have the last one for deleting data. So those are all going to be very useful. Alright, so first of all, we want to work on this method that actually creates the database connection. So inside here, we're going to remove that pass. Then we're going to, so it's going to be the method we shall use to create MySQL database connection. So now we're going to first create different details. So self, mydb. The reason I put self is that this variable can be accessed towards other functions. So we're going to create the MySQL connector. So here we shall have the host name, which shall be localhost. Then we shall have the user, which shall be username root. Then we're going to have a password, but it shall be blank. Then we're going to create with the database employees. So remember, the database name is employees. Then after that, we can now return. So we're going to return the self.mydb, so it can be accessed by other functions. All right, so there we go. Alright, so I forgot to add commas, and those are going to be very useful. So we're going to go back and add them. Then after that, we're now going to create different labels, and then we're also going to create different edit forms. So we're going to go back to the very top. Then inside here, we're going to create some Q labels. So now the first Q label shall actually be that for name. So we're going to have name label. Then we're going to call it name. Then we're going to have that for the profession. Then we're going to have that for the address. So we're going to have the address label. Then we're going to have the age label. Once we're done that, we can now also create the different edits. So here we're going to have the name line edit. So we're going to have the name line edit first. Name line edit. Then we're going to create this inside Q line edit. So copy that. Then we're going to have a duplicate of that. Then we're going to change these names. So we're going to have that for the profession, that for the address, and that for age. Now, since we want each of these variables to be accessible to every function, we're going to add self throughout, because the line edit should be accessible in other functions, since we're going to be making different changes using it. Alright, so now we're going to have each item pair laid out horizontally. So we're going to have the name, queue label, and its line edit laid out horizontally. So that's going to be the very first thing. So we're going to have H layout, and this should actually be a QH box layout. So we're going to have to add the different widgets. So we're going to add the widget for the name label, and then also going to add the widget for the name line edit to that. And then we're going to lay these horizontally. So we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to do each one in pairs horizontally. So that for the profession, and then it's line edit. So we're going to make those changes, so edit them. Then we're going to create the next one, create one for address. So this shall also be laid out horizontally. So call this HLayout3, then change the variables. So next we're going to copy that, then we're going to have the last one for edge. So change this HLayout4, and there we go. Alright, so next we're going to add some queue push buttons under that. So go back to where we actually have the line edit. So we actually created them. Then we're also going to create queue push buttons right there. So now we're going to create them queue push buttons. So the first one is going to be that will allow us to add data. So we're going to have it as a queue push button. So we're going to call it add new row. So once we've done that, now we can actually decide what happens when it is actually clicked on. So button.addData.clicked, so it shall call the function add data when it is actually clicked on, and this is what it will actually call. So go back, and that's what we have. So we're going to duplicate that, and we're going to create a different one. So we're going to have one that will actually allow us to update the data. So we're going to call this, change the name, update selected row. Then this will actually call this function right here. Right, so the next step shall be to add these buttons into our horizontal layout. So we're going to lay the pair of them horizontally. So scroll down under this layout here. Then we're going to create a horizontal layout for both of the buttons. Then we're going to change the text. So this is going to be push buttons horizontal layout. So change that to horizontal layout 5. Then we're going to change the widget to button names that we had actually created. So there we go. So once we've done that, we can now display all items that we've actually created. So we're going to display them onto our main widget. So we're going to create layout. So this is going to be to lay out everything vertically. So we're going to create the first widget. So the first widget, actually it's going to be a layout. So we're going to add the first layout, and it shall be HLayout1. Then we're going to have all the other layouts also coming after. So this is going to be the order they shall be displayed vertically. Then we're going to set this layout. Alright, so for this to work without mistakes, so we're going to go back and comment the clickable call. So we're going to disable this temporarily so that it can actually work. So we can now test it. Then we can actually see that it actually works properly. So this is how they are organized. Alright, so there we go. Alright, so the next step shall be first create our queue table widget. So we're going to scroll, go under the last layout we'd actually created. Then we're going to create the queue table right in this position. So we're going to create our queue table. So we're going to type in table as the variable, which shall be equal to queue table widget self. So inside here, we're actually going to set the maximum width of the table. So set maximum width, and it shall be 800 pixels. Then enter. We're going to set the column count. So we're going to have 4 different columns for the different items we actually have in our SQL table. So there are 4. So now we're going to set for the individual width for each different column. So we're going to set individual widths. So we're going to label them from 0 to 3. That is because the first column is actually understood as being 0. So we're going to have 0, 1, 2, 3. So that is the labels for all the columns. So we're going to have age being 50 in size. Then we're going to now set the horizontal header labels. So we're going to have that for name. Then we're going to have that for profession. Then we're going to have that for address. So these shall be the labels that actually appear at the top. Then we have that for age. Now, since I want my table to be accessible to all functions, I'm going to add self to the variable table. And there we go. So now I'm going to add the table to the display of the element. So I'm going to have it as the next item in the vertical layout. So I'm going to add the widget table. Then we're going to add self.table. Now that we've done that, we can go to the main and run our app, and you can see the table is actually displaying. So it is actually working perfectly. Alright, so now we want to add more push buttons under the table. So we're going to create more push buttons. So now we're going to first create the next one. So the first one is going to be to load data. So this will help us load data. So it shall be under the cube push button, then it's going to be labeled load data. Then we're going to set what happens when it is actually called. So when you call this button, it will actually call the load data function. So remember the function we had created called load data, so it will actually call it. So duplicate this, then we're going to create other 3 buttons. So now we're going to change the naming of all the buttons. So the first one at the top should actually be to insert data. So let's call this one. So it will actually display the demo text that we actually would have created, and we shall see that as we proceed. So now we're going to change this to insert data. So it will call the insert data function. So now change that to insert data. So go into the third one. And we're going to use this button to actually extract data into our main frame, as you shall see. So change this to, so we're going to call this extract data. So it's going to call the function call data. Then we're going to change this next one to delete data. Of course, this will enable us call the delete function, which will help us to delete different data in the row. So we're going to call this delete data. Then we're going to comment these out so that we can actually test it for now. So just comment the parts that actually are used to call the different functions for now, because we've not yet created anything inside the function, and we shall actually use these later. So now we're going to add these buttons into our elements. So we're going to display these elements also. So we're going to add these widgets. So we're going to type in layout add widget. So we're going to add these buttons. So we're going to add the button. So the first one shall be the button that inserts data. So remember, the way you actually add them here vertically is how they will actually be displayed at the end. So we're going to change all this. So change this to load data. We're going to change this one to the next one, which shall be to call data. Then change this to delete data. So once you're done with that, go back to the main and run the Python file. And as you can see, we have our buttons right there. Alright, so something I want to do is I want to lay out all these elements at the top inside the group box. So that's what I'm going to do next. So now let's go and see how to do that. So we're going to go back, and then we're going to create a group box. So we're going to create a group box for the labels and the edits and those first buttons. So we're going to create the group box. It shall be called add form and shall call queue group box. And we're going to call it add new employee as the title. So inside here, we're actually going to lay out all the items vertically inside the group box. So we're going to lay out the h layout 1 to h layout 5 inside here. So we're going to add all the layouts. So we're going to have h layout 1 up to h layout 5 inside here. Then we're going to actually set these. We're going to add these and set them inside a group box. So now next, we're going to go to where we display all our elements. Then we're going to delete all these at the top. So we're going to have these actually in a group. So delete them. Then we're going to change this to add widget, because group box is actually a widget. Then we're going to change this to the name of the group box, which is add form. And then we can actually test that again. And then as you can see, every element at the top is actually inside a group box. And that's what we wanted, the group box with the title add employees. Alright, so for the first step, we're going to insert some demo data. So now we're going to first create the cursor object. Of course, this will actually help us to execute MySQL queries. So now here we're going to call it cursor variable equal to. So we're going to connect it to that function create connection. Then we're going to call cursor. And then that's it. So next we're going to create the list of tuples that we're actually going to have as our demo data. So this is going to be called list of employees, and then we're going to list the different items. So remember to group them by name, profession, and address, and then the age. So now these are going to be 4 different items with different names. So make sure to change the names, and then make sure that each one is unique. Then we're going to make sure that the professions are actually also unique. So make sure to edit that. We're also going to make sure that the addresses are also set uniquely. And we're going to change the edges to make them unique. So once we have that, we can now insert multiple rows to actually our table. Now in this case, we're going to execute many because we're inserting multiple tuples at the same time. So we're going to insert into employees list, type it that way, where we're actually going to have the different tuple values. So this is what we have. So we're going to have the mydb.commit. So we're going to commit them, then we're going to close. Once we have that, we actually have a mistake here. We're going to correct the mistake here. So I forgot to actually add connect. It would not work if I didn't add that. So I make sure to add connect. And then once you have that, we can now go up here and go to where you have this button of insert data. Then we're going to remove that comment so that it's actually active. So once it's active, we can now go into our database, and as you can see, our table is empty, so there are no values currently. So that means we're going to insert values for the very first time. So we want to insert that demo data from the tuples. Okay, so we go back right here, then we're going to actually run it. Let's see what happens when you actually run it. So now we've actually opened it. Now let's see what happens if I actually insert the data. As you can see, oh, I have an error because I've actually not typed employees list correctly, so I have to correct that. So this is not spelled well. It's actually supposed to be employees list, so I've forgotten the letter P. Alright, so now it should actually work well. So let's try that again. So I'm going to run the Python file again. So go here, then run Python file. So now when it opens, we're actually going to click insert data again. And I believe this time it has worked, though there is no way of proving it, but let's go and see. And when I actually reload this, as you can see, the text has actually gone into the table. Alright, so that's okay. But now I want to make sure that I will actually see some text inside my terminal here every time data is inserted successfully. So now I'm actually going to have the text demo data inserted in table to actually prove that it has actually inserted successfully. So let's see if this will actually print. As you can see, it actually prints, so it's actually working. Alright, so now we're going to go into the load data function so that we can load data into a Qt database. So first of all, we're going to create the cursor function as we have here, and then next we're going to write down the SQL query. Select all from employees list. Alright, so next we're simply going to set the row count as the number of items in the employees list. So we're going to have to find the length of that SQL query, so that will give us the number of rows. So now we're going to make a reference to the very first row. So we're going to start with row 0. So we're going to let the first table row be equal to 0. So now we're going to get all the records from the execution. So now we have this inside here, and now we're going to fetch it all, and we're going to set all these records inside a Qt table widget. And then next we're going to make a reference to each individual item in the row. So it will be like 0, 0, 0, 1, and so like that. So change this to 0 to 0 to 3, and then each Q table widget item represents an item in the row. So once we've finished that, we can now go and remove the comment of the load data. Then we can start this and run the Python file. Alright, so here we go. So we're going to run the Python file to load the data in the SQL database. But before we do that, we're going to go back, and you can see the data that is actually in the table that we're going to load. So now let's click on load, and as you can see, we've actually successfully loaded the items in the SQL database. But you can see we don't have age, so age is actually missing. So what's the problem? Let's actually correct this problem. So let's go back here, and as you can see, it's because I have to set this to a string, because age was actually an integer, and here it will actually display only text items or strings. So we set this to a string, and I believe that it will now work properly. So that's a mistake that I actually made. So now let's close this, and then we're going to load that again. So let's load this Python file again. Let's run it, and then once it runs, we can now click load data again, and let's see what happens. Alright, as you can see, the table data actually comes, and as you can see, the age column is also present. So that means it's actually working perfectly just as we wanted. Alright, so now we're going to add a new item. So what happens is I want to make sure when a user types on these edits and clicks on add new item, that this table actually is filled with a new item. So how do we do that? Let's go back to the function of adding item. Alright, so now we're going to remove the past, and then we're going to create our cursor. So cursor is equal to self dot, then we're going to make a reference to the function that actually creates the connection, then we're going to call it. Right, once we have that, now we need to create a list of the different items in the queue edit that actually refers to the queue line edits. So that's what we're going to do next. That's going to be very important. Alright, so I'm going to create a list for them, and I want to call my list new employee. But because I want this list to actually be referenced easily from anywhere, I'm going to call it, put a self next to it. So it's going to be self.new employee. Now we're going to create a list. Now in the list here, we're going to make a reference to the different items that refer to the queue line edit that we had actually created before. So remember, we'd actually reference to them with self, so that they're actually accessible inside any function. So now we need to look to where we had actually created them. So I'm going to scroll to the top, and we're going to check where we'd actually created our queue line edit. So remember, the names we'd actually given the queue line edit. So we're going to refer to those variables. So the first one is going to be name line edit, and then we're going to refer to its text. Then we're going to create the next one. So now change and create one for the profession. We're going to have one for the address, and then we're also going to have one for the age. So when we're done having the text, now we can actually create our query. So now we're going to insert row into the employee list table. So we're going to insert a new row. So now cursor.execute. So we're going to have our query inside here. So we're going to have a query insert into employees list name profession. So we're now referring to the different headings of the different columns inside the table in the MySql database. Then we're going to make a reference to them with that %s sign, and then right outside we're actually going to put the list. So the list is new employee, so remember that self.new employee. Now once we have that, we can now close this. So now we're going to write self mydb commit, then we're actually going to close that. Now that we're done with this, we can now go and check we're going to check the button where we actually refer to that. So let's go to the button add data, and then we're going to remove the comment from it so that we can actually make it active. So it's actually right at the very top. So remember to actually add .connect right next to where we say clicked, so that it actually makes the connection, and I believe that now it should work properly. So now go there, and then we're going to run the Python file. So now we have it here. So we're going to have to try to type, but before we do that, let's load the list. So these are the list of items that we have presently already in our table, in our employees table. So now we're going to type in a new employee. We're going to call the new employee Lionel Messi. This is a footballer with the address. I'm going to put Miami because currently he's playing at Inter Miami. Then the age is 36. Then we're going to add that. Now to check it, we have to load the data, and you can see it actually appears perfectly. So that is actually working. Alright, so let's try adding another piece of items. So now it's Cristiano Ronaldo. This is also a footballer. We're going to have him at Saudi Arabia. The age is 38. Let's add that, then load the data, and as you can see, it also appears perfectly. So next, I want to make sure that this the table here, the edits actually clear up whenever I actually add a piece of information. So how do I do that? I'm going to copy this information here for the line edits, and then I'm actually going to create another. I'm going to call the clear method inside them. So change this to clear, have them under this set of text. So after it inserts, it actually clears that. Then we actually want to print something. So I want to print some information to actually show that it has added a specific piece of information. So it should actually tell us it has added the name. So it will show the name of the individual that has actually been added. So let's run that again. Now I'm actually going to add the name of a basketballer. I'm going to try LeBron James. I'm going to have the profession as basketballer. Then I'm going to put Chicago for now. And I'm going to add the age. I don't know the age currently, but I'll just add something random. Then when I add, you can actually see it actually clears. But let's load and see what happens. As you can see, it actually cleared the information in the line edits after that. And as you can see, it also added. And that's what we wanted. And as you can see right at the terminal, you can actually see LeBron James is actually shown. You added LeBron James. Alright, so next one, make sure that when an item is actually selected in the table, we can actually extract the data, and the data will actually appear here inside in the form. Then you can actually click update to update everything. So what we're going to do is going to have first extract the data from the row that is selected. So now when a row is selected, we want to make sure that we can actually extract the items from that row. So we're going to call employee details in that selected row, and we're going to assign them to variables. So now we're going to assign the first variable. So now the first variable is going to be called name edit to collect the very first variable it picks from there. So we're going to equate it to that, and then we're going to set different variables to actually pick up different items from the selected item in the table. Remember, they actually have to be declared as strings so that this will actually work perfectly. Alright, so now that we've done this, we're now going to set these variables to actually be equal to the values that are actually on the queue line edits. So we're going to write it this way. So now we're going to call it the name line edit. Then we're going to set its text to the variable on the name edit. Then we're also going to do it for all the different queue line edit variables. We're going to set their text to the variables above depending on name, profession, address, just like that. So now we can actually go to the very top and look for where we actually have the extract data, so that whenever this happens, the data is extracted and it is put on the queue line edit. So let's run this and see if it actually works. So here we go, we have it blank, but before we do anything, we're going to first load the data. Now we have the data here. So let's see what happens when you select a piece of data and click extract. It should actually work. As you can see, it actually extracts the right data. So it's going to extract the data for Cristiano Ronaldo. Let's try it for Emmanuel. It will extract the data for Emmanuel. Let's try it for Barbara. It will also do the same thing. And let's try it one more on another item. Which one? Let's try Esther. As you can see, it also works. So it's actually working just as we wanted. Alright, so now that we know how to extract data, now we can now work on the updating functions. Let's go to the updating function. So first of all, we're going to create the cursor variable. So this is going to make a call to the function that actually creates the database or initializes the connection. So now we're going to create a list of the current text in the line edit. So we're going to make a reference to the current text in the line edit. So that means to be the text that actually comes when you've actually changed the different items. So now we're going to have them here. So this is going to be the current text. So we're going to have that for the name, for the profession, for the address. So now have them inside the list new values. So now we can actually execute. So we're going to execute the SQL query, update employees list, set name. So we're going to put percentages in each one before we actually set the tuple at the very end. Now wherever there is a where, we need to create the old variable. So I'm going to make using of an old variable because we need to make a reference to the old variable, because it's saying insert this where there was originally such a thing. So we're going to make a reference to the old piece of name, and that old piece of name, remember, was named name.edit. So we're going to insert these new items where we actually originally had the name. So it's going to be the column that originally had the name.edit. So that is how we actually refer to this. So we're going to need to have new items and the old item on the where. So now that is what we want. So now we're going to add the tuple at the very end. So comma, and then we're going to add the tuple. The tuple, remember, is called new values. All right. So now that we have that, we want to print something on the terminal every single time a user has actually updated successfully. So we're going to print the old name of the currently selected row, and then we're also going to print the new name, so that we actually know that actually the items are changed. So remember, the new name is name line edit dot text. So now we want to clear the different queue line edits every single time this happens. So let's actually also add the clear variables right here. So once we have that, we can now close this. So we're going to self_mydb.commit, and then we're actually going to self_mydb.close. Now that we've done that, we can now go to the very top, look for where we have the button of updating the database. So it's at the very top. So we're going to remove the comment remove it, and then we're going to add that dot connect. So I'd actually forgotten to add it, but we're going to correct that right now. So dot connect. Alright, and now I believe it should work perfectly. So now go to main, and then we're going to run the Python file. So once it loads, let's actually test it. So first of all, we need to load the data. Then we actually have to select the piece of data. So let's select LeBron James. Then let's extract the data. Now we have it there, so we can now make any changes we want. So we're changing that from LeBron James to Michael Jordan. And Michael Jordan, I believe right now is a businessman. Let's actually change that. Now I believe I'm just going to put California. Why not? I'm just going to change this to California. And once I'm done with that, I don't know his real age, but I'm going to try 50. Never know he's 50. So now let's try updating. So click on update. So you can actually see it actually clears, and then let's load to actually see if LeBron James changes. As you can see, LeBron James row changes to Michael Jordan. So that means that the updating function actually worked. Let's try it for Emmanuel, but this time let's only change a single piece of data. Let's only change a part of Emmanuel's name to Emmanuel Christian. Let's see what happens. So let's update that. Then we're going to click load. As you can see, his name has changed to Emmanuel Christian. I believe that's a sign that the updating function actually really works perfect. And as you can see in the terminal, it's actually printing old name and the new name every single time you actually make a change. Alright, so next we want to add a delete function. So what we want is every time an item is selected, it will actually delete that row every time we click delete row. So go into the delete function, and we're actually going to create the cursor. So connect it to the create connection, and then dot cursor, and then we're going to type the current row index. So now we need to make a reference to that row that has actually been selected. So we need to index that row of the current row. Then we're actually going to pick an item inside that current row for actually reference purposes. So now all the time I've actually chosen name to actually represent my primary key as the unique piece of item. So I'm actually going to make it name. So I'm actually going to make a reference and get that item in the row at that point. So convert it to text. Remember, it has to be a string for this to work. So now I want to make sure that if no row is actually selected, there'll actually be a warning message box that will actually show the user that they've actually not selected anything. So the warning will actually be saying, please select a record to delete. And else, if actually they've selected a piece of row, it will actually send a different message. By this time, it will actually be a question. So it will be a question of confirmation to actually make sure they've actually willing to delete. So we'll be asking them, are you sure you want to delete the selected row? So they actually have to be sure. And then when that happens, they can actually click on yes or no. So under this, we're actually going to create some two standard buttons. So queue.message box, we're actually going to create a standard button for yes and a standard button for no. So remember to add the keyword standard button right there before the yes and the no. Then now when you actually have done that, we can now actually go down, and actually we're going to ask another if. So if they've actually selected yes, it means they actually want to proceed. So if it is yes, they can actually delete the item in there. So we're going to call an SQL query. So the SQL query shall be delete from employee list, where we're going to have that name that we actually selected up there. The name would actually referenced at the top, so the name item. So now we're going to reference it here. Then make sure to place that comma right there. So we're going to print you deleted the row with name. So this is the name, so we're going to make a reference to that name, and then we're actually going to commit the information here. Then we're going to close this part. Alright, so we're going to scroll to the top and look for the delete button, and then we're going to remove the comment right there. So remove the comments that we actually have this active. So now we have it active, so you can actually go to the main and run the Python file. So once it loads, so now we can load the data in the table first. Then we're going to select a random piece. Let's actually select the Michael Jordan piece, and then let's click delete. As you can see, the message box appears and says, are you sure you want to delete the item? Yes. So now we can actually not see it. Actually right now I cannot load, but let me see. I think it will actually work if I actually close it and open it again. So let me see, try it again. So remember we deleted Michael Jordan. So let's actually run that Python file again and see if it actually worked. Let's load the data. As you can see, Michael Jordan actually disappeared. So it actually means it actually deleted. I don't know why it didn't work the first time. Let's actually try again. Click delete. You can see the message box. Yes. Load data. For some reason it seems I actually have to run the Python file again to see that the delete function has actually worked. As you can see, that actually deleted. So I'm actually going to keep trying and see until it actually works perfectly. So let's load the data again. So this time let me actually select the information of Emmanuel Olega. Let me delete that again. As you can see, let's load the data, and as you can see, the name has actually disappeared. So it means it actually probably works. So there was a lot for me to share with you in this video, but this is what I wanted to share with you. I hope the information really helped you. If it did, feel free to give the video a thumbs up and tell me below in the comments if it actually did. Then if you're new to this channel, I encourage you to join the community by subscribing, and then make sure to hit the notification bell so that you get updates every single time I upload a new video. Thank you so much for watching. See you in my next video. Bye.